Well, good day. My name is Rick Pekan, and I'm here in Perth, in Western Australia, taking a walk. I think it's important to take a walk and to have good conversations at the moment. And I'm here with my friend Tom Little, who is a Banjara Bibbulmun man from the Nyoongar people here in the southwest of Western Australia. And I wonder, Tom, if to start this conversation we're having, if you could share what this place is that we're walking right now.
This place here is known as Mulyin Lake. Mulyi is the word for nose in our language, and this area was a men's business site. We would come here and the senior elders would have their noses pierced, their septums pierced. So this was a rite of passage and a mark of great respect and honour. So it was a very significant men's business site.
Yeah, that's interesting. And what I guess you mentioned about the piercings, does this places like this still have significance for Indigenous people today?
Absolutely. I mean, just the very name is evocative for us. It tells us the role of the place. Mulyin, nose. And we still honour this place and will forever as a site of certainly cultural significance, if not sacredness.
It's important to acknowledge myself as a white fella taking a walk with you, that I think we come from very different backgrounds and very different experiences. You know, Perth here is not the place where I grew up. I was born in the United States. I was born in Chicago. My family on my mother's side were Italian. My family on my father's side were German and Slovakia background. But I moved here about 12 years ago, and I wonder, for a person like me, a white fellow who's newish to Australia, even though I've been here over a decade now, if you could explain, what is it like living as an Aboriginal man here in Western Australia?
Well, living in the mainstream, we basically have to subsume our culture underneath the mainstream, which simply means that we don't go out in public and make too many noises about what we do, what we are, and what we know. So we tend to keep those, particularly those significant and sacred things, to ourselves. So, you see a lot of pictures of Aboriginal people in the news, and quite often they're standing with their face down. It is because they just don't want to let on what's going on around them. It's not because they're either being ignorant or being embarrassed about what they're doing. They just don't want other people who are not adepts, if you like, to know what's going on.
That's interesting, Tom, because, growing up in the United States in Chicago, my interactions with African Americans and minority people in the States was very limited in my upbringing. I lived in a very privileged white suburban area. But it was actually just when I started uni that there was a professor of mine who called me out and actually talked to us about the Bible's call for racial reconciliation, for equality, and to understand people who didn't look and think and grow up like we did. So my story is that as a 19, 20-year-old kid, I had the opportunity to drive out of my suburban area into the middle of the inner city Chicago and have breakfast, soul food breakfast with African American pastors. And this mentor of mine encouraged me and set up the space for us where we white people had to listen, not to talk, but to hear their stories, to in many ways hear their pain, to hear the oppression that they had faced in their lives, and to be able to overcome that, and to, just the experiences that they had with that. And for me as a young person, that was so important. It was so vital for me to learn and to hear those stories. So it's sad for me to hear that in many cases you've had to be silenced, that you haven't been able to share your cultures and your norms with the people around you.
Yeah, true. But silence doesn't mean opting out or ineptitude or anything like that. Silence can often just mean taking a breath and listening. And in fact, my elders used to say to me, Tom, smart people talk, but wise people listen. So, listening's been a part of our culture. I mean, one of the things about walking on our land is as we walk, we listen to what's going on around us, because the land itself will tell us what we need to know about it and about what's going on. So listening was always a very important part. So I'm really glad that you're very adept at that.
Can you tell me about anything we're hearing right now? Do these sounds that you hear right now have any meaning or significance?
Oh, it's beautiful bird life. This is an aquatic setting, and we can hear the swamp hens calling. There are also some large geese on the far side there. They're actually mountain geese. They are most of the time up in the hills, particularly when it's hot, but when the weather is cool like this and the lakes down on the coastal plains start to fill up, they come down to lay their eggs and then they go back into the hills again. Mm-hmm. But there are parrots. You just heard a 28, what we call a 28. It's a ring-necked parrot. And there are other birds as well. And this place, because it's lined with trees, is a natural haven for them. And here they can drink, they can eat, they can interact without people threatening them too much. Mm-hmm. And that's always good.
It's a good transition. As a Aboriginal man living here in the West, do you feel safe living here? And do your friends, do your neighbors, do the other Aboriginal people feel safe living here in Perth and Western Australia?
Well, I can't speak for everybody, of course, mm-hmm. but for myself and my own family, this is our home. This land is not only just home, it's also our heart. It's also our mother. It's also very, very culturally significant to all of us. So living in a place like this is not threatening, mm-hmm. not dangerous, because the land's in our heart. Mm-hmm. So, and we live and love it that much. Mm-hmm. And all around me I see signs that animals are thriving, and the water's good, and there are tadpoles, there are water beetles. They're all signs that the water's pretty fresh, and that's good.
Okay. Well, as we keep walking, I wonder, we've obviously all seen in the news the sad murder of George Floyd in the United States. I wonder, as an Aboriginal person here, what's been your kind of reaction to that, and what have you felt as you've seen not only the murder, but the reactions of people both in America and here in Australia?
Any life lost is a tragedy. One of the things that our people do is, if a life is lost, they dream. First of all, they go back and dream about what that person was and their impact and influence on the land and on the people. Mm-hmm. And if it was a young person, then they go back and they will dream forward to see just what that life might have led to, you know? Mm. And, to see all the positive achievements that spirit, that being, that person might have made. And part of the remembering of them is to honour them and to honour, first of all, their impact, but then secondly, what they might have meant to the land. And the dreaming is specific in that. We honour our dead in very specific ways. Mm-hmm. And that, a life like George Floyd, what if he became the next Martin Luther King Jr.? What if, as a child, he inspired someone by his spirit, his laughter, and his joy in life to become something special, to become something better? Mm-hmm. We won't know the answers to that, but we're free to dream. We're free to at least paint a picture around him that he really, really might have deserved. And that's part of our process. Mm-hmm. That's part of our dreaming, and part of honouring our dead. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting to the way that you would reflect on someone like George Floyd, who's passed away. It's an interesting debate in Australia today now about, is there a connection? You know, we can sort of assume all that George Floyd and the police, brutality is an American thing. But can you tell us, is there a connection between what happened to George Floyd and what is happening today here in Australia?
Oh, I don't see it. I don't think there's any doubt at all that there's a connection between both regimes. I mean, it's a simple fact that in a situation where you don't know something or someone, you tend to be suspicious and you tend to react aggressively.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's human nature. What we've got to do is we've got to cure that, start people loving each other again. You know, it was Christ himself that said, you know, love is everything.
Yeah.
And that's what we've got to do. We've got to stop trying to order the world to suit ourselves and start trying to order ourselves to suit the world, to suit the people around us, and to actually fit in, as in not only just in an ecosystem like you would in a place like this, but also in a community.
Yeah.
The Greeks have a lovely word. It's from where our word Catholic comes from. The word Katholis in Greek is community. And all that denotes, and one of the major things that denotes a good, solid working community is communication.
Yeah.
Talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So important.
Yep.
So important. Now, tell us about, I mean, you yourself are a policeman. Tell us about what was that like being an Aboriginal who was a policeman here in Western Australia?
It's almost an oxymoron. But I was a cop for 10 years and I loved being a police officer, and I like to think I was fairly creative in my solutions to a lot of situations, particularly those that involved violence of any sort. Because if you can dial down the violence and dial up the empathy, you can start making conversations which lead to creative solutions. That was always my way.
Yeah. So in thinking about empathy for people like George Floyd who have died in America, there's this weird connection that possibly is quite strong in the sense of the police brutality that's happening in America, but also the Aboriginal deaths in police custody here in Australia, where over 400 have died in police custody since the early 90s, and many more probably before that. So how do you, as an Aboriginal man, but as a former policeman, hold in tension this conflict that seems to be happening even here in Australia?
Well, it's one of those tough questions, because the deaths get me right here in the heart, obviously. And I grieve and I mourn for those who died, not only here, but also people like George Floyd and others, Rodney King, and the other stories we've heard. As I said before, they are tragedies in and of themselves.
Yeah.
But out of tragedy often comes opportunity. I would really love to see some of the strictures relaxed in both regimes, particularly here in Australia. We are not so, we are radicalised, but we are not so popularised, because our population is a very small part of Australia, where the Black American and Native American populations in the States are quite significant and able to carry, if you like, a far greater message across. We don't have that here, but the thing is, if we can pool our resources and make this not only just a local thing, but a worldwide thing, whereby we create a critical mass of really good ideas. If we get those really good ideas to coalesce, then we can start making some real progress. And unfortunately, we don't know how many people it's going to take to have to die before this starts becoming reality. But the reality is that we've got to keep looking at that as the prize that we've got our eye on, so that we can work towards achieving those real and meaningful changes. And as a Nyoongar, I feel very sorry for my people. As a cop, I was administering the law, and the law was very black and white. So I honestly think there's a great deal more room for things like discretion and careful consideration underneath those very rigid black and white laws. And I think that perhaps there should be some creative input into those areas. And the other thing that I find too is that as a Christian, I also have an agenda here, and my agenda as a Christian is to say to whomever, I forgive.
Yeah.
You know, and that can be the hardest thing to say at times.
Yeah.
Especially when you see the pain that's caused to some people who really suffer because of the situation. And that forgiveness is a hard thing to achieve. But once achieved and hard won, it should be held on to for dear life. Because I believe that dear life is the issue. You know, it matters.
It's the bedrock principle of Christianity. It's a foreign concept to the rest of the world. The rest of outsiders is forgiveness. It's this idea that we do forgive, whether it's someone who's wronged us, whether it's someone who we don't know. We forgive because Christ forgave us. It's such something that's needed to hear in the world. Is the concept you've mentioned, the idea of empathy, the idea of listening, the idea of forgiveness. It's so missing in many of these conversations.
Absolutely. And as I said right near the very start, smart people talk. Wise people listen.
Amen. So Tom, when we think about racism in America, when we think about prejudice against people with different color skin, when we think about the racism even here in Australia, the issues of Aboriginal deaths in custody, I guess my last question for you as we finish this walk is, what can us white fellas do to support Aboriginal people? What can white people even do in America to support their African American and minority brothers and sisters in America?
Look, that's a hard road, but it's going to take all of us. Yeah, and all of us have to give something so that all of us have something to take out of it. And that means that, you educate yourself. You read, you understand. Hey, go find a black fella and ask some questions, you know? And look, you might ask some stupid questions, but you also might get some stupid answers. So it all evens out in the wash, you know?
It does.
We just got to do it. We just got to ask. And we've just got to accept that we don't know it all. And that, I have to tell you that, my wife, who is non-Indigenous, and of the very pale-skinned persuasion, suffered racism from within my own family when we first got together. And so it goes both ways. And it takes both ways to find a cure or to kill, whichever way you look at it. It's a two-way process. In our language, the word for sharing is wallaking. But when we share with each other, we say wallak wallak. You share, I share. We both get something out of it that way. So it's a two-way process.